All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to pick up here with the nullification crisis. This is still under President Jackson. So to understand the nullification crisis, it's kind of the origins of how the Civil War breaks out. Essentially, pass a protective tariff. This is a tariff on imports. Tariffs are taxes that we place on foreign products to protect domestic markets here in the United States so that we can sell things cheaper here. Now, in today's world, it's a lot harder to get away with this because it makes all products more expensive, essentially. President Trump is putting tariffs on steel and aluminum, and it's affecting car industries and things. We're going to have to increase prices on those because we can't make it as cheap as places like China. So it does have effects. Now, tariffs at this point really only benefit the North. The South wanted to trade cotton with Europe and their raw materials because they were largely farmers. And it didn't benefit them to have this tariff because it just meant European countries weren't going to buy as much cotton from the United States. So, South Carolina, their state legislature votes. And remember, states are supposed to have their own laws and their own responsibilities. They vote to nullify or essentially not enforce this law. They're not going to go along with it. So they're not going to enforce this law in their state. They said, we're just not going to charge this tariff, and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, this makes Andrew Jackson furious. Remember, he is a very powerful president. He doesn't want to be questioned. So he threatens to send troops into South Carolina. He threatens to go to war against South Carolina if they don't adhere to this federal law. And it kind of becomes a constitutional crisis. Can states, independent states with their own governments and their own rules, defy the central government? And the answer was definitively no. States cannot nullify laws. And this was such a huge controversy. Jackson's vice president, John C. Calhoun, that you can see in the top of this image, resigns as a vice president of the United States because he's so furious about Jackson's handling of the nullification crisis. And it clarifies the debate a little bit about states' rights versus federal supremacy. These are still issues that we have going on today. Can the federal government ban marijuana, but some states have it legalized? That's a question we're still debating today. What's the central government and the state government's authority, and where do we draw that line? And it's such an interesting question. Okay. Next on our list, we have the Mexican-American War. So the Mexican-American War was fought between 1846 and 1848 with President James K. Polk that you see up there in the top. He's the guy on the left. And the general in charge of American troops was Zachary Taylor. So Zachary Taylor and several different American forces, they set up shop right across from the designated border from the Mexican troops, and they kind of provoke the Mexicans to shoot on them. They kind of go onto Mexican territory, then off of Mexican territory. So the Mexican military actually provokes or actually fires the first shots of the war. Polk wanted to go to this war. Polk wanted to attack Mexico to potentially expand territory, to settle disputes over Texas that were lingering still. So he lures them into this war. Zachary Taylor and the American forces are far superior to the Mexican forces. They advance quickly through Mexico, victory after victory after victory, until they eventually seize Mexico City and take the capital. By February of 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is signed, ending the Mexican-American War. What we do is we actually purchase territory from the Mexican government. We buy what is large parts of modern-day New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, California, and Nevada. So this is another huge land transaction for the United States where we gain a large amount of territory. It's also a definitive win for the American military that shows that we are a force to be reckoned with in North America and that we are far superior to probably one of our closest competitors in Mexico, that we could storm through their countryside and take their capital within a matter of a few years. Shows that we are far superior. We are the superpower of the continent. So just some quick ideas of what the war looked like here. You can see the different battle maps. You can see the disputed territory between Texas and Mexico. You can see how the large territories that we end up taking from them. And you can see the blue are United States victories. You notice there aren't any red stars. That's because there were no major Mexican victories. You do have Santa Anna as the general of the Mexican forces, who is largely celebrated in Mexican history as a hero, but was soundly defeated in many of these battles. Okay, another thing we would like to talk about is the women's rights movement in American history. And it's largely that the women's rights movement comes in with two other movements. Women want rights as far as temperance, which is a ban on alcohol, and abolitionism, banning slavery. That's where women start to grow and gain a lot more power and authority. And with the Great Awakening, talking about this individualized relationship with God and how all humans are important, women gain more self-worth as well during this time period as well. So they help lead the charge for a lot of their own rights. And a lot of people ask the question, well, why do women want to ban alcohol? Why would women want to be a part of the temperance movement? You have to understand perspective. First of all, people drank a lot more alcohol in the late 1700s and early 1800s compared to today. Some historians estimate that they were drinking about 8 times more alcohol and beer back then than we do today. Who was doing the drinking? It was unladylike to be consuming alcohol. So women weren't the ones consuming alcohol. It was men consuming mass quantities of alcohol. Why did that affect women disproportionately? Women didn't work, so they relied on their husbands for income. And if a husband was spending large portions of their income on alcohol instead of supporting their family, it made life extremely difficult on the woman. Secondly, women were repeatedly abused sexually and physically by men that were coming home intoxicated, consuming too much alcohol. And thirdly, children were being involved in this. Women were at home raising the children, and men were spending the money and abusing them and beating them and becoming alcoholics. And they truly believed, and their sincere belief wasn't because alcohol is inherently bad, but it was that men were abusing alcohol and therefore abusing their wives, and women had nothing to stand for on that. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton is one of the first major figures in the women's rights movement, and they helped organize the Seneca Falls Convention, which is the first women's equal rights convention in American history. They also have different abolitionists there as well, so they're fighting for freedom of slavery. And the famous quote that Elizabeth Cady Stanton comes up with in the Declaration of Sentiments, comparing it to the Declaration of Independence, but 60 years later, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equally. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man towards woman, having the direct object the establishment of absolute tyranny over her. Essentially what she's saying is women need to be treated equally to men from now on. Manifest Destiny is something we'll get more into on the next video, so I'll leave it right here and we'll pick back up in our next video and we'll finish our chapter 0 notes. Thank you.